think the history of sport on TV is largely the two persuading, or especially TV, persuading sport it should be on TV, which is always a problem. I'll tell the great story about the Grand National. It took 10 years of Peter Dimmock trying to persuade Mirabeau Topham, who owned the Grand National, that the cameras should be there and it would help the sport. Now you have almost the reverse thing of sports like, say, squash, trying to persuade TV that this is a good sport for telly. But the history of it is, and especially with football, they were always very, until Sky really, they were very loath to allow the cameras. They'd like to keep the cameras at a distance. You know, you couldn't announce in advance what match was going to be on Match of the Day. And clearly they were wrong, because the crowds are bigger than ever, and yet the weekend you've got 5 matches live on telly. Sports report tune, Out of the Blue, which they've tried to change several times. They've tried to update it, but you know, you'll never beat that. You'll never beat it. And I mean, TV has a lot to thank Sports Report for. You know, because Sports Report was the first time radio sort of unbended a bit and became more live like that. And really, Grandstand grew out of that. Grandstand and all the live sport that you see now, it all grew out of Sports Report. Angus Mackay was the bloke, was a legendary radio producer, and he invented that Sports Report, and they unbended a little, and he had people like J.L. Manning, who was a brilliant newspaper columnist, wrote about sport, and he got him in, a newspaper columnist, to give his view of things. And all those of us who go on things like Fighting Talk and and give a view on 5 Live about stuff, we owe a debt to Angus Mackay. We all remember the breakdowns. There was always breakdowns. There was always captions coming up. You know, normal service will be resumed. He coped with all that. He was a guy who could cope, Coleman. And athletes, you won't hear an athlete of the era saying a bad word about him. He was an athlete himself. You know, if he hadn't got injured, he could quite easily have been an Olympian. He was, you know, the first amateur to win the Manchester Mile, which was a big race in those days and everything. So he understood, absolutely empathised and identified with the athletes who took part in the Olympics. Now, Kenneth Wolstenholme, who your younger viewers won't remember, who, you know, was the voice of BBC Soccer in the 50s and 60s, Kenneth Wolstenholme used to turn up with a piece, it's all in the book, but he used to turn up with a piece of paper with just a few penciled in notes. He'd have a gin and tonic with some of his mates, turn up and then commentate without having any great grasp of the facts. He was very slow at identifying players, where, you know, commentators like, for instance, Peter Drury, who's on ITV now, gets a lot of flack because people think he's too verbose. Clive Tilsley, another one, talks too much. But the beauty of it is, I've phoned Peter Drury up sometimes to get some background on something, just prior, say, a month prior to a big tournament that's going on, like a Euros or a World Cup. And he said, oh, sorry, I had to break off. I'm watching DVDs of the Bulgarian team. And he's watching them so he can recognise every single Bulgarian player. Now, they might go too much into the background of it, but at least they spot the players. Whereas for the book, I watched a lot of old footy from the 60s, where Wolstenholme said, it's a goal, yes, it's a goal. Yeah, well, we know that, we've seen the ball go in the net. And then about 60 seconds later, he'd say, yes, that's a goal, Smith who scored. Do you know what I mean? There is a balance to be struck, and I think the best commentators, John Champion I think is a good example, will let they'll use their background from time to time, but will let the play flow a bit. And also, don't forget, commentators now are subject to so much more scrutiny. The social networks, you know, they say, well, I'm not going to look at what they're saying about me on Twitter, but you can be damn sure they are looking at what they're saying about them on Twitter, and therefore they're under that much pressure. You know, everybody's got an opinion. Whenever I write stuff about old commentators on the message boards and everything, there's a lot of respect for Barry Davies. Some great moments when you look back and you see the great quotes from sport. he could do the fan bit. Just look at his face. Look at his face. He could do all that, and he got the dramatic swoops and things from Davis. He got a bit crabby towards the end, and the Italians, will they never learn? Paul Fox invented the idea of the teleprinter. He invented Grandstand really together with Peter Dimmock, who was another early boss at the BBC. But he brought in the teleprinter. Initially, and again, it's a story I tell in the book. But initially, Grandstand was going to end at 4:40 to give time for children's television and other various things, and regional programs, the various things the BBC wanted to do in those days. And Paul Fox, he must have wanted to bang his head against a brick wall, because he said the results are just coming in at 4:40, and the actual billing for Grandstand used to say, all the action as it happens, and some of the final results. In those days, when there was no internet and there was no other way of getting the final results, the fact they were promising some of the final results, I can remember going to, because it was also the days of regional newspapers in their pomp, printing a football special. And I can remember queuing up outside the newsagent in Manchester at 5:10 on a Saturday for the Football Pink, which is the Manchester Evening News' football special. And I didn't know the results of some matches. I'd watch Grandstand, then it would cut to children's TV at 4:40 or whatever, and I'd have to run down to the shop, queuing up outside, and literally, older people, you're in your 50s to remember this, but older people will remember the guy turning up in the van with the football specials, throwing them out the van, and they'd be like vultures, leaping up just to scare the results, because there was no other way to get them. I think actually buying into one TV channel to get everything, goodbye, that's all finished. The whole nation sit around to watch Morecambe and Wise, the whole nation sit around to watch the Grand National. I think that's finished. Well, it's clearly finished, because the BBC haven't got the Grand National now, and Morecambe and Wise are dead.